For as long as I knew her, her name was Elizabeth. We met online at a tightrope walking convention. The moment our eyes met, I fell for her, and when I struck the crash mat, I knew that I was in love. And that love hit me hard the moment she fell from the tightrope and landed on my face. As we lay there together, like lovers often do at the start of a passionate affair, one with their nose pressed between the buttocks of the other, I realised this was the first time in a long time that I'd felt whole. With delicate grace, Elizabeth lightly removed her posterior from my shattered nasal septum, then turned to me and gazed intently into my eyes. She then uttered her first words to me, words that grabbed my heart and filled it with such warmth it was as though they were the first words I'd ever heard. "Do you need an ambulance?" I gazed longingly into her eyes, and the romantic in me spoke out. "I do," I replied, as images of getting married in France washed over me. "Camembert," I whispered before passing out. Why I said such a cheesy thing I'll never know. When I woke in hospital, Elizabeth was stood over me, her stilts on either side of the bed. Ah, she was divine, such beauty, I cannot even begin to describe it because I lost my thesaurus, but she was a beauty nonetheless. And yet there was an odd look in her eyes. She said to me with a hint of sorrow in her voice, "It's almost time." "What is?" I asked, still dazed. "The word lime," she said. After a long awkward pause, I decided to take a chance. "Do you fancy a drink?" I asked, my voice trembling from the vibration setting on the bed. "No," she said. "Fancy you." But despite what she said, we still ended up going for a drink. A few days later, I was released from hospital and we met at a local cafe. Ah, it was glorious. We sat in bliss for hours, talking with hot coffee in our hands, seeing how long we could last before we needed to use a cup. There was a great connection between us, a connection that grabs you, holds on tight and refuses to let go. Over the next year, our love grew like an erection. And if my love for her was a low sperm count, then I was completely sterile. We did all the things you could expect of young lovers, enjoying as we did parks, restaurants, the cinema, museums and S&M torture conventions, the latter of which proved to me that you both can and can't beat love. We even talked about having kids, but London was no place to raise goats. Of course we were not without our disagreements. What to wear when performing our tightrope double act, whose house to stay over at Christmas, and what to do with the ransom money, to name but a few. Still, despite these setbacks, we were both able to laugh, thanks to our seemingly infallible belief in each other and a constricting sensation in our larynxes. But that laughter faded, and our lives changed for the worse after a series of unfortunate events fell from a shelf and broke Elizabeth's foot. Damn you, Lemony Snicket. A month later, after countless hospital visits and a long, hard recovery process, Elizabeth's cast was taken off, but she was unable to walk as she had done before, with both feet. On her release from hospital, despite being unsteady, she insisted we walk home. On the way back, we stopped off at a supermarket, and Elizabeth lost her balance. She slipped, falling into some French bread. She cried out in pain. No pain. As she lay there in soft, flowery pain, I realised that our tightrope walking days were over. What I didn't realise is that our days together would be over soon too. The very next day, we had a joint tightrope walk that had been in our schedule for months. While I thought it was ludicrous that we continue, Elizabeth insisted we go ahead with it. The event was a sight to behold, a building site to be precise, and our task was to walk on a line over it. Despite my protests, like fools, we pressed on with the performance, egged on by the audience of maybe 1 or 2 people. Needless to say, we fell, and this time not in love, but into a large plot of wet cement. From that day on, life was hard, and we found it difficult to move on. Elizabeth never walked on a tightrope again. Instead, she got a job in McDonald's, working at a primary school. Perhaps stricken by denial, I tried to continue solo, but there's only so low you can go before you have to face facts, as any limbo dancer will tell you. I did a tightrope walk in an old people's home, but without Elizabeth by my side, I was scared, and when I was halfway across the wire, I panicked and shamefully cried out for help, but my words, and then I, fell on deaf ears. I landed on a lady with Parkinson's disease and as a result was severely shaken. That was the last time I ever came into contact with both a tightrope and the lap of a fitting elderly person, and it seemed fitting that I would give up on my dreams the way they had started, except this time with the lady's nose pressed between my buttocks. Elizabeth resented me for giving up on tightrope walking, and as a result we argued a lot. The woman I had loved was no longer the woman I loved. Instead, she became a woman I didn't love, unlike before when I loved her. My head was in a mess. I travelled to Paris, Rome, Bombay, Tokyo, and I still couldn't find my car keys. There was worse in store for Elizabeth and I, though. Elizabeth was fired from her job as a primary school teacher for having a tattoo on her face. She blamed me because when she told me she was going to get a tattoo, I said to her, "On your own head be it." Our final argument came on a day like any other, except it was Monday, 28th of September 2008. I was in the kitchen feeling tense, fondling camping equipment being a recent hobby of mine, when Elizabeth hobbled in. Sorrow was written all over her face thanks to our misunderstanding about the tattoo, but this time it was also written in her eyes. She had an old spotted bikini from our tightrope walking days clutched tightly between her buttocks. With tears in her eyes, perhaps because it was wedged that far in there, she took the bikini from between her cheeks and handed it to me. All the frustration that I had carried over the past few long, frustrating months caused me to quite simply lose it. Then I found it, and then I lost my temper. "Face facts, you and I will never do tightrope walking together again," I yelled, slamming my hand down. In a calm voice, she simply said, "Goodbye." Then she turned and left. I stood there in shock, having just placed my hand in the toaster. Perhaps it was cowardice or the realisation that we could never have what we once had that stopped me from going after Elizabeth, but it was more likely that it was the 240 volts surging through my body. Fate moves in mysterious ways, I thought as I was catapulted 15 feet across the room. I also thought that perhaps I should have moved that shelf full of antique machetes like Elizabeth had requested, as I collided headfirst with it. Although that was soon the last thing on my mind when, as a result of my impact, the ceiling caved in. The bathtub came as a shock, perhaps more to my father who was in it at the time. Another shock came in the form of my mother, who had fallen through the hole in the bathroom floor when she had heard my dad yell. But perhaps the most shocked of us all was the dog, as being dragged through a hole wasn't the normal ending to a nice walk. But despite all the excruciating pain, all I could think of was Elizabeth, all the good times and the bad, and how much all that and everything in between meant to me. A lot. I would have chased her, but there was a feeling in my gut that stopped me, caused by the weight of the bathtub. Elizabeth was the last thing in my mind as I slowly slipped into unconsciousness. When I awoke in hospital, I was awake in hospital. I expected Elizabeth to be stood over me, but she wasn't. All there was a battered ceiling. As I stared up at the thin crack in it, I recalled the first time Elizabeth's rear flew towards me from the tightrope. "Elizabeth," I whimpered. "Yes?" I turned and saw a bunch of grapes. I then turned the other way and saw Elizabeth. Tears formed in both of our eyes, and we smiled at each other, then embraced each other tightly, knowing that we would make it even without a tightrope in our lives. Summarily speaking, we realised that on balance, we had been happy together. Now, it was time to give it a go, off balance.